The calendar read September 8th, 2014. That Monday, in a small guitar school in Los Angeles, a cocky 36-year-old teacher turned to the old man sitting quietly at the back of his classroom and laughed. "Go on then, grab that guitar and show us what you've got, if you can even hold one." He didn't know he'd just spoken one of the most shameful sentences in the history of rock. Carlos Santana had only offered one small piece of advice, and the young teacher had taken him for a curious retiree who'd wandered in to learn to play from the students. It should have been an ordinary lesson, but something no one would ever forget was about to happen. Carlos Santana didn't get angry. He just started walking toward the untouchable guitar on the wall. The truth is, Carlos hadn't come to play that morning. Before every big tour, he did one thing. He went to see an old friend. For years, he'd stopped by that little school, had a coffee, told a few old stories, then headed off. The hallway was empty when he came in. His friend was still in a classroom finishing a lesson. Carlos didn't hurry. He pulled a worn brown leather notebook from his jacket, wet the tip of his pencil, and started sketching. Not notes, little marks, the skeleton of a rhythm. From a classroom down the hall came the sound of guitars, young, unlined hands playing. It all sounded clean, clean as glass. Carlos closed the notebook and walked toward the door. The door was ajar. Inside, a bright room full of window light. Guitars hung in a row on one wall. An old tube amp hummed in the corner. In another sat a dusty stack of records, the top one wearing a faded rock cover. 9 students sat in a half circle. The room had an unwritten rule you could feel the moment you stepped in. Here, worth was measured in speed. The faster your fingers, the more you counted. Slow, old, or quiet meant invisible. The teacher sat across from his students. Andrew was 36, in a pressed black T-shirt and expensive sneakers, a heavy Rolex on his wrist. He'd pulled up out front that morning in a red Porsche, the keys still on the desk where everyone could see it. When Carlos appeared in the doorway, Andrew glanced up, then turned back to his students. He didn't stand. He didn't offer a hand. Come in, he said with a careless wave. "There's a chair in the back. Just keep it down. The kids are working." Carlos tipped his flat black hat in thanks and sat quietly in the back row. He wore a mustard yellow linen shirt, a single turquoise ring, a silver piece pendant, a few thin bracelets. The turquoise stone turned deep blue for a moment in the light. No one turned to look. Andrew went on with his lesson. "Now," he said, clapping his hands, "today I'm taking you up a level. Tapping, the technique 2 million people have watched on YouTube. Learn this, and you jump to the top of the class for speed." A student held out his guitar. Andrew took the boy's right hand and set the pick between his thumb and index finger. "Hold the pick like this, then tap the fretboard with your middle finger. Pure speed, milliseconds." The student tried. It wasn't bad. Young, hard-working, eager. Andrew pulled out his phone and checked an app. 186 beats. Passable. But the guy in the video is over 202 million views didn't come for nothing. The student's finger caught, and a note slipped. "Half a beat behind the metronome," Andrew said without a nod. "That shows in the digital. It doesn't wash out. Again." A low voice came from the back row. "Making a mistake isn't a bad thing," Carlos said almost to himself. "If anything, it makes you better." Andrew didn't hear him, or pretended not to. Carlos listened, arms crossed, head tilted. Something bothered him. Andrew was showing the kids the middle finger, but that technique wasn't born from the middle finger. On his knee, Carlos's own right hand twitched the index. Muscle memory, remembering the right one. Andrew was teaching the wrong finger and didn't even know who'd found it. Carlos's voice was low but clear. "Excuse me," he said slowly, "but the finger's wrong. Eddie didn't strike the strings with his middle finger. He used his index. That was his whole secret. Everyone copied him later, but most did it with the wrong finger." The room went quiet. Andrew turned to Carlos, then let out a short laugh. "Eddie? Which Eddie? Look, old man, I'm not upset with you. But this technique came from the current instructors online. If it's watched that much, it's right." He waved a hand, swatting the words away like a fly. Here's the strange part. Andrew thought he was a success because of the millions of views, but the millions had watched because the man playing that guitar was Eddie Van Halen. One of the students, a quiet boy in the back, opened his mouth. He'd just turned 18. His were the softest playing hands in the class, and the ones that spoke the least. Maybe his father had played him a Van Halen record when he was small. His lips moved, then closed. It wasn't worth it. His word counted for nothing here. But Andrew had already moved on. What matters is who's fastest today. This is young people's work, reflexes. Maybe it was different in your day, but not anymore. Carlos didn't answer. He lowered his head, looked at the floor, then raised it again. He'd known that look 1,000 times back when he was nobody, in the long years when no one took him seriously. He was used to it, but it never wore smooth, and that was the bitter part. Growing old didn't make the look easier to bear. It only made it easier to stay quiet. He kept sitting, saying nothing. Andrew relaxed. For a teacher, there's no sweeter moment than being proven right in front of a stranger. He leaned back against his desk, arms crossed, and turned to Carlos with that thin, self-assured smile. "Look, since you know so much," he said, "go on, grab a guitar, and show us what you've got, if you can even hold one." A few students laughed. The rest didn't. They just turned, curious, and then something happened. Carlos didn't get up. If he had, it might have stayed an ordinary argument. But he didn't. He waited. The silence stretched, and no one was laughing any more. Everyone was waiting to see what the old man would do. Two sides now filled that room. On Andrew's, a comfortable, winning arrogance. Whatever the old man did, he was the boss here. But the quiet boy couldn't take his eyes off him. Another student had put his phone down. Inside, everyone watching, the same sentence turned. "Come on, show him." Carlos had a plan. Then, without any hurry, he stood. An old body carrying the tiredness of his 60s, but inside the calm of a man who'd sweated through thousands of stages. He straightened his hat, walked to the wall, and paused to count the guitars. A Gibson, dark cherry in the body. Beside it, a Fender, then a Gretsch, and a bright Rickenbacker at the end. And dead center, where everyone could see it and no one could touch it, hung a PRS, a little card beneath it. Special. Students may not touch. Carlos reached not for the card, but for the guitar's neck. His fingers found the cold lacquer of the mahogany body. He waited, felt the faint tremor of the wood in his palm. Most people picking up a guitar start playing right away. Carlos just held it first, like shaking hands with an old friend. Andrew stepped closer. "I said that guitar is special, didn't you hear? It's not even for the students." Carlos didn't so much as glance at him. He lifted it off the hook, slipped the strap over his shoulder, and plugged into the amp humming in the corner. Then, without looking at the fretboard, He felt out the strings. Thousands of hours in a single touch. He rolled the volume knob back no more than a fingertip. No one in the class understood the move. But behind that knob was all the warmth about to fill the room. He closed his eyes. His left foot, without anyone noticing, began to keep time on the floor. The class fell silent. No one was laughing now, and no one yet knew what was about to be played. When Carlos struck the first note, no one expected anything like it. The expectation was set. The old man makes a few clumsy sounds. Andrew is proven right. But that first note came and the air changed. A single note, long, warm. It rose out of the amp, climbed and didn't die. It hung in the air as if the guitar were breathing. Then the second note, and after it that familiar, dark, seductive melody opened up. Black Magic Woman. Not from a record. Live, slow burning, filling the whole room. The students turned doubtful at first, then curious. A girl in the front row stopped playing, her hands falling still in her lap. The quiet boy sat up. There was something in this sound he knew, something old sleeping in his memory. His body swayed softly with the music, his eyes closed. The volume knob he'd rolled back was earning its keep now. Every note came out round and full like a human voice. He bent a note, his wrist turning slowly, and the sound wept. He let it go, and the sound laughed. This wasn't speed. This wasn't a number. This was resonance, the lost frequency the world had long forgotten. A hush settled over the room. The girl in the front row took off her glasses as if she'd hear better without them. Andrew set his phone down, its metronome still ticking away, pointlessly. No one looked at the numbers anymore. There was nothing left in that room to measure. This was something neither YouTube nor a metronome could ever teach, an ancient knowledge, the moment ego surrenders to the music. Just then, the door eased open. The friend from the hallway had finished his lesson and come toward the sound. He stopped on the threshold. He didn't speak. He only listened, recognizing not with his eyes but with his ears. Then he smiled quietly. When the last note came, Carlos didn't cut it off. He left it in the air to its own devices. It thinned and melted into the silence of the room. A long, heavy nothing. No one applauded. They couldn't. They were still trying to grasp what had happened. It was the friend in the doorway who broke the silence. He stepped inside, his eyes shining. "I knew you from all the way down the hall," he said to Carlos. "Anyone who hears this playing once never forgets it." Then he turned to the class, his voice calm but clear. "Kids," he said, "the gentleman who sat in the back, his name is Carlos Santana." The name dropped into the room like a stone, then rippled out. First, a whisper, "Santana!" Then the quiet boy, his eyes huge, murmured, "I knew it. I knew that sound from somewhere." The girl in the front row brought a hand to her mouth. The smug smile froze on Andrew's face. The color drained out of it. "Carlos," he began, and couldn't finish. The man he just told, if you can even hold one, had played the Woodstock stage, won 10 Grammys, given the world Black Magic Woman. His Rolex wrist dropped to his side, the watch suddenly meaningless. He wanted to speak. His lips opened, closed, just like the quiet boy he'd hushed. And right there, a whole morning's arrogance crumbled quietly under a single sentence. Carlos didn't lower the guitar, but he stopped playing. He turned to Andrew, and there was no anger in his voice, no triumph either. "Don't be hard on yourself," he said. "I just want to show you something." He took out his old phone, its screen cracked, its case worn, found a video with a few taps, and held it out. On the screen, A young man with a guitar tapping the fretboard with his index finger, not his middle fast and fluid, never stopping. Andrew looked once, twice. It was the exact technique he'd taught wrong to those kids all year, the right version of it. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice thin. Carlos answered softly. "The man who created the technique you didn't know the name of and taught wrong. Eddie? Eddie Van Halen?" You could hear Andrew swallow. His hand trembled as he handed the phone back. "You were right," he said. "I learned it off the internet. I never once wondered who'd found it." For the first time, there was none of that arrogance in his voice, just a small, honest shame. Carlos put a hand on his shoulder. "Son," he said, "one day you'll be old too. And on that day, the hands you call too old will be the hands you play your best with, because by then your fingers will remember more than the notes. They'll remember everything you've lived." Then Carlos did something no one expected. He took the phone again, found a name, and made a call. Someone answered. "Hey, Eddie," Carlos said, half a smile on his lips. "There's an eager kid here who's curious about your technique. You got a minute for him?" A short silence. Then Carlos held the phone out to Andrew. Andrew's hands shook like a child's as he took it. On the other end was the man whose name he hadn't known an hour ago. The man he'd built his whole trade upon, waiting not for the old fellow he'd mocked, but for him. "Hello, sir," Andrew managed, his voice cracking. His eyes filled. He was 36, but in that moment he'd turned back into a 10-year-old holding his first guitar. In one corner of the room, some began to laugh, some to wipe their eyes. That day, Carlos and his old friend sat in the little kitchen at the school. 2 old cups, plain black coffee, a joke left over from years ago. For a long while they didn't even talk about music, just sat, 2 old men content in each other's silence. The friend cupped his mug in both hands, knuckles swollen, his eyes bright as youth. "You come before every tour," he said at last. 20 years now. Carlos shrugged. "It does me good," was all he said. And the thing left unspoken was the thing they both understood. This wasn't a habit. It was a thank you. On his way out, something caught Carlos's eye. Andrew's expensive digital pedal board had gone dark somewhere in the chaos of the morning. "Dead. I'll toss it and get a new one," Andrew said out of old habit. Carlos shook his head. "A soldering iron," he said quietly. "And this comes back to life. Throwing it away is always the easiest thing." Andrew paused and looked at the old man as if he were writing that down somewhere. Then Carlos turned to the PRS on the wall, to the students may not touch card. He looked at his friend. "That quiet boy in the back," he said. "He plays the softest of all of them. That guitar is too alive to sit in a display case. Let it be his." The friend smiled, took the card off the hook, and put the guitar into the hands of the boy who'd never once found the courage to ask for anything. The room's unwritten rule collapsed right then, without a single word. Months later, Andrew invited Carlos back to the school, but not to seat him in the back row this time. When Carlos walked in, the students were on their feet, greeting him with their guitars. Europa. That weeping, longing melody rose from all those young hands at once. And this time, every note came not just from the fingers, but from somewhere deeper. Andrew was up front. He taught tapping the right way now, the index finger, not the middle. And he spoke Eddie's name at the start of every lesson. On his desk, instead of the Porsche key, sat that broken pedal board from that day, working again. He'd fixed it himself with a soldering iron. The quiet boy wasn't so quiet anymore. That PRS in his hands, he played up front now, and every now and then he'd glance back at the empty old chair and smile. When the lesson ended, Andrew turned to Carlos and said just one thing. "You were right. Those hands do remember everything." Carlos smiled and tipped his hat. "Some things only time can teach you, and time never rushes anyone."